In Exodus chapter 14, God instructs Moses to lead the Israelites to a strategic location where he will demonstrate his power in a grand way. God instructs Moses to lead the people to camp at Pi-hahiroth, located between Migdol and the sea, facing Baal-zephon. The Lord reveals that he will make Pharaoh think that the Israelites are trapped in the desert, unable to escape. This thought will cause Pharaoh to harden his heart, and he will pursue the Israelites. God's purpose is clear. He wants to be glorified through this situation, demonstrating his power over Pharaoh and his entire army, so that the Egyptians will recognize that he is the supreme Lord. While Moses and the people follow God's instructions, news reaches Pharaoh that the Israelites have fled. In an act of regret and wounded pride, Pharaoh and his advisors wonder why they allowed the Israelites to leave, thus losing their manpower. Driven by indignation and the intention of capturing the fugitives, Pharaoh prepares his army with renewed vigor. He selects 600 of his best chariots, in addition to all the other chariots in Egypt, and places captains over each of them, forming an impressive and fearsome military force. With his heart hardened by God himself, he decides to pursue the Israelites, who had left Egypt with hope and determination. The Israelites, camped near the sea, begin to feel the weight of the imminent pursuit. They watch from afar as the Egyptians approach, with their chariots, horses, and horsemen moving quickly toward the camp. Fear and despair grip the people. They cry out to God and, with voices trembling with fear, turn to Moses, asking, "Were there no graves in Egypt, that you brought us to die in the wilderness? Why did you take us from there to face this end? Didn't we tell you that we would rather serve the Egyptians than die here?" Moses, noticing the panic among the people, stands up with confidence and faith. He reassures them with firm and hopeful words, telling them not to fear, for God was about to perform a great deliverance before their eyes. He promises that the Egyptians they see today would never again be a threat, for the Lord would fight for Israel while they should simply remain silent and observe divine salvation. Moses reaffirms that God was in control of the entire situation. At this point, God instructs Moses to command the people to go forward and, with a symbolic act of authority and faith, raise his staff over the sea, dividing the waters so that the Israelites would pass through on dry land. He warns Moses that he will harden the hearts of the Egyptians once more, so that they will also enter the sea after the Israelites, but that this pursuit will only serve to glorify him, because the Lord will show himself superior to Pharaoh and his army. The purpose is to make it clear that the God of Israel is sovereign, and no earthly power can stand against him. As the Israelites prepare for the moment of crossing, a sudden change occurs on the battlefield. The angel of God, who had been in front of the Israelites, moves to the rear, positioning himself between the army of Israel and the Egyptians. The pillar of cloud that guided them during the day also moves back, creating a protective barrier. For the Israelites, the cloud shines, illuminating their path and filling them with confidence. For the Egyptians, however, the cloud becomes a thick darkness, hindering their vision and plunging them into confusion. It was as if the divine presence itself was dividing the night, separating the safety of Israel from the chaos that was befalling Pharaoh's army. At God's command, Moses stretched out his hand over the sea. A powerful wind arose from the east, blowing all night, parting the waters and creating a dry passage between the enormous liquid walls that had formed. The Israelites began to cross, treading cautiously, but guided by faith and by the vision of the impossible becoming real before their eyes. The waters rose up like high walls, visibly awesome and magnificent, protecting the Israelites on the right and left. It was a surreal and terrifying scene, with the sound of the wind and the waters echoing as silent witnesses to the divine power. Pharaoh, stubborn and blinded by his pride, orders his soldiers to advance, leading all his military force into the path that had been opened in the sea. With their chariots and horsemen, the Egyptians pursue mercilessly, but confusion and panic begin to spread among them. God intervenes again, causing the wheels of the chariots to disarray, which begin to come loose and make it difficult to maneuver. The Egyptians realize that they are being fought by something far beyond their strength. "Let us flee from the presence of Israel, for the Lord fights for them against Egypt," they cry to each other, recognizing that their defeat is inevitable. With the crossing of the Israelites complete, God orders Moses to stretch out his hand over the sea again. The waters, which had been held back, return with devastating force, closing in on the Egyptians who were trying to escape. Pharaoh's entire army is swallowed up by the powerful waves, and not a single survivor remains among the chariots and horsemen who dared to challenge the power of the God of Israel. The sea, which had once been a passage of salvation, now becomes the silent tomb of the enemies of God's people. When morning comes, the Israelites contemplate the scene. On the shores of the sea, they see the bodies of the Egyptians scattered on the beach, a sight that seals the end of the persecution and marks the beginning of a new phase for the people of Israel. They recognize the immense deliverance that the Lord has wrought that day and are filled with reverence and fear of God. Moses, God's chosen leader, gains even more the trust of the people, who now firmly believe in the Lord and in his servant. This passage, which begins with despair and ends in triumph, is one of the most striking demonstrations of God's power in biblical history. It shows not only the divine ability to intervene in human history in a direct and miraculous way, but also the importance of faith and obedience to God's promises, even when all circumstances seem to indicate otherwise. The sea closing over the Egyptians and the miraculous crossing of the Israelites become an eternal symbol of the Lord's deliverance and supreme power over any force that tries to rise up against his people.